And so last week in this, we began the Sermon on the Mount. We looked at the Beatitudes. We looked at the first 10 verses of Matthew 5. And Jesus is beginning, this is the biggest, longest recorded sermon of Jesus' 3-year ministry on earth. And he said a lot of, you want to talk about a stumbling block, he said a lot of things. You're going to hear a lot of things this morning that if you were a Jewish person or you're an American in 2024 that thinks, you ask the average guy on the street, what do you have to do to get to God? Or what do you have to do to get to heaven? Or how is it that you relate to God? And it's like, well, you just let your good outweigh your bad. You try your best. You do unto others as they would have do unto you. And you follow the golden rule. Like, that's the kind of stuff we hear, right? And so Jesus is going to put all of that on its ear. He's going to put a stumbling block in front of any kind of thinking that there's any way that anybody could ever get to God. He wants to make it abundantly clear that we are absolutely lost and we are absolutely without hope within ourselves. And so the Beatitudes last week, the first 4 or 5 verses we looked at, there were this blessed are. So Jesus kind of was changing the perception of what it means to be blessed. And so there were these 4 attitudes. The Sermon on the Mount starts with, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are the meek, and blessed are those who hunger or thirst for righteousness. And so this is a crazy thing to say to this audience, because they had been under the law, and the definition of blessing was following the rules. If you follow the rules, then you'll win this battle. If you follow the rules, then you will prosper. We went through some of those verses last week. And Jesus is changing the definition for these people of what it means to be blessed. The only way that you have true blessing is in relationship with God through Jesus Christ. And the only way to get to God through Jesus Christ is to recognize that you're poor in spirit, mourn over your condition, be humble or meek enough to receive the gift of a relationship with Jesus Christ, and realize that you are hungry for righteousness, that there is no way to achieve righteousness or rightness, or there's no way to be such as you ought to be apart from a relationship with Jesus Christ. All right, so now we're going to kind of take a 30,000-foot view at the rest of Matthew 5, 6, and 7, which is known as the Sermon on the Mount. All right, so as we look at the Sermon on the Mount, we're going to see some very difficult verses. We're going to see some verses that on the surface don't make any sense. And when you kind of peruse the commentaries, or you go to YouTube and you type in the Sermon on the Mount sermons, and you sort of take a broad view of interpretation of Matthew 5, 6, and 7 over the years and over the decades and over the centuries, you can kind of boil it down to 3 options. You kind of got 3 options of how it is that we're going to interpret this passage. The first would be to interpret and apply it literally. Like, literally look at what the verses say and literally decide that the Sermon on the Mount is a formula for living, that this is what you have to do, that when Jesus was talking to this audience, that he was also talking to us right now after the cross, and that is what he was saying in that sermon is literally what we have to do to be in right standing with God. That this is the update to the law. And there's a problem with that. We're going to see that this morning. We're going to see that if you were to take the Sermon on the Mount literally, it conflicts. It conflicts with the rest of Romans and Ephesians and Galatians and Hebrews. It just doesn't. The two don't come together. You'll see in the Sermon on the Mount it says, if you don't forgive other people, then your heavenly Father will not forgive you. And then 5 chapters later, Paul in his letter says, forgive others because or as you have been forgiven by God, past tense. It's 2 separate ways to think about forgiveness. In this Sermon on the Mount, it's a threat. if you don't forgive other people, then God will not forgive you. And he says it twice to make it abundantly clear. And then Paul says it twice to make it abundantly clear. We forgive other people from the heart because we have already been forgiven. So what Paul's saying is not conditional, but what Jesus is saying is conditional. All right, so we've got a problem if we're going to try to interpret, and we're going to see a big problem today if we try to interpret it literally. All right, the second option is to water it down. Well, Jesus was just kind of speaking hyperbolically, it was kind of a fishing story. Like the fish really wasn't that big. That, you caught a 5-pounder, but you told everybody it was a 15-pound fish. And so Jesus is just kind of speaking tongue-in-cheek. And so when he says that your righteousness has to surpass that of the scribes and Pharisees, or when he tells you to be perfect, or when he tells you to gouge your eye out, he didn't really mean it. And so we can water down the standard of the law. This was just him kind of yelling, and you know how preachers are. They kind of oversell stuff. And so that's another option for Matthew 5 through 7. But we're going to see one of the very first verses of Matthew 5 goes against that idea. And so what I want you to see this morning is this third interpretation, that Jesus meant everything that he said. You don't have to water it down. And you have to, but what you have to do is you have to interpret it in the context of all of the scripture, and you have to know the audience, and you have to know what his purpose was to the audience, and then you have to interpret it in light of the new covenant. Remember, Jesus had not died on the cross yet when he was saying this. So he hadn't held up the cup at the Last Supper and said, this is a new covenant in my blood. And so we're looking at Jesus talking to an old covenant audience before Jesus had died. So we don't have to water it down. We don't have to say he was just kind of talking tongue-in-cheek to shock everybody. But we can interpret it together in context and in light of the audience. All right, and so you're going to see Jesus' purpose this way. And I want you to think of it this way. What's the world's definition of a good coach? So let's assume that you're trying to become the high jump champion. So the world record for the high jump is, this is hard to believe, the world record high jump, that's, where they run and then jump backwards and arch their back over the pole. The world record is 8 feet and 1/4 inches. All right, so I'm tall. The top of my hand is 8 feet and 1/4 inches. So that's 8 feet. So you can imagine a pole this high and someone trying to run and jump over that. So a good coach, the world's coach, the way that you would achieve that, right, is you would train. You would start off with a lower bar. You would start off with maybe a bar a foot off the ground and work on your technique. And then you would work out and you would do squats and you would do all these weights and all these exercises. And you would train and you would train and you would get better and you would get better and you would get better. And so the world's definition of a good coach would be to slowly over time raise that bar. But we're going to see that Jesus doesn't coach that way. Because in this analogy, the level of the law, while it might be in the Jewish audience's eyes is 8 foot and 1/4 inches, the bar is actually incredibly high. So in our analogy, the pole vaulting, pole vaulting is where you run with the pole and you stick it in the ground and go over. The pole vaulting world record is 20 feet. All right, and these are 4-inch bricks, so 20 feet is the top of the brick. And if you're watching on the stream, you're not going to see what I'm talking about, but the top of the brick on that column is about 20 feet high. So you can imagine if that's really the standard, if that's really the standard of the law, in our analogy, would a good coach have somebody try to jump over 2 feet and 3 feet and 4 feet? When if that's really the standard, there's no way they can get there. The only way they can get there is by using the pole vault, right? And so you would train them, you would tell them in a different way. Think about it this way. So the Atlantic Ocean is the shortest distance is from Brazil to Liberia, and it's 1,770 miles across, okay? And the world record for the longest open water swim is 120 miles. Okay, so if you take the world record, the best person who has ever done open water swimming, and you stick them in Brazil and you tell them to swim to Liberia, what's going to happen to them? They're going to get about 115, 120 miles out, and they're going to drown. They're going to die. So is the loving thing to water down the standard? Is the loving thing to say to world record swimmer, hey, swim to Liberia, it's only 100 miles. It's only 100 miles and go for it. And we train everybody to swim 100 miles. That's not loving. That's not a good coach, when reality is there's no way you're going to make it. Everybody's going to drown. And so whether you've trained your whole life and you get 120 miles, or you get up off the couch and dust the Cheeto dust off of yourself and jump in the Atlantic and you make it 3 miles, the end result is that everybody drowns. And that's what Jesus is going to show us this morning about the law. That's what he's going to show us about the standard of the law. That the standard of the law is the Atlantic Ocean. The standard of the law is 20 feet. So stop trying to get there on your own. There's got to be another way to get over. You're going to need the pole to get over the 20 feet. Or you're going to need a cruise ship or a speedboat, right, to get across the Atlantic. There's no way you're going to get there on your own. And the sooner that you discover that, the sooner that you discover that you can't get there, is when you're going to cry out, and we're going to see this morning, ask and seek and knock for the way, for the rescue, for the way to get across the Atlantic, or the way to get over 20 feet. All right, right away at the beginning, so remember we said, maybe we could just water down the standard. Well, right away he says, do not think that I have come to abolish the law. Don't think that I've come to abolish the law of prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Okay, so right away, he knows what he's going to say. I'm going to tell you some difficult stuff, guys, this morning. So don't think that you can water this down. I'm not coming here to get rid of the standard. I'm not coming here to get rid of the law. And you better not change 1 inch of what I say. Because if you start to water down 1 inch of what I say, then you're going to start to think that you can get there on your own. You're going to start to think you can get across the Atlantic. You're going to start to think that you can train enough to jump over 20 feet. He goes on, he says, for I tell you, right away in Matthew 20. So he says, you don't get rid of the standard, and right away he's going to introduce the standard. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And so right there, he's taken the bar from here, what they thought was 8'4", and he's raised it all the way up to 20. All these, hey, Jewish audience, all these scribes and Pharisees that you look up to that are supposedly keeping all the law perfectly, they're measuring out 10% of their spices to make sure that they tithe enough. Your righteousness has to exceed that, or you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. All right, then he takes the law and he puts it on steroids. You're going to hear, you have heard it said, and all of them had heard it said. They had all heard the law since they were this high, when they started going to the temple. He says, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you, everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. So you can imagine the audience. Maybe there's some Pharisees and some scribes there, and most of the people there probably had not murdered. And they say, so he said, you have heard it said that you shall not murder. And people are like, all right, check. But then he says, even if you've been angry with your brother, it's in the eyes of the law, it's the same as murder. And so everybody is toast. Then he goes on, maybe you haven't gotten too angry. Whoever insults his brother. How many of you have been on a road trip with your brother? Right? I got a brother. Maybe you have a brother or a sister. Go on a road trip. Drive to Miami with them and see if you insult them, right? So right away, we're starting to whittle down the people who qualify for righteousness, right? Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the Sanhedrin or the council. And then whoever says you fool will be liable to the hell of fire. Does this sound like the gospel to you? This is the opposite of the gospel, right? So what is Jesus doing? He's taking this audience who thought that righteousness could be achieved on their own, people who were proud and who weren't thirsting and hungering for righteousness because they thought they had it. They weren't humble and meek. They weren't mourning over their condition because they thought they were okay. And Jesus is going to show them, and he's showing us, that apart from Christ, you are not okay. You are not okay apart from Christ. Maybe you haven't murdered, but odds are you've insulted your brother. Maybe you have, or odds are maybe you haven't even gotten angry, but I'm sure you've insulted him. And I'm sure at some point in your head or with your mouth, you've called somebody a fool. And so right away, everyone is disqualified. All right? And so let's just say maybe you've gone through that. All right, so you've heard that it was said you shall not commit adultery. And I'm sure most of the people in the audience are like, all right, check, haven't committed adultery, I'm good. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Okay, so adultery and looking at somebody, like he's equating the two. He's raising the bar. So if adultery is 8:4, looking at a woman with lustful intent is 20 feet. So again, I'm sure a bunch of people here and a bunch of people in the original audience are sort of like squirming in their seats, like, all right, I'm starting to see. All right, and then in the next verse, he comes up with the solution. So if you look at a woman with lustful intent, you're guilty of judgment. If you say things to your brother that you call him a fool, you're going to be thrown into hell. Then what is the solution? Look at Jesus' solution. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better for you to lose one of your members than your whole body to be thrown into hell. If your right, as in there twice? Yeah. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell. All right, so here's what he's saying. If you look at a woman with lustful intent, you're worthy of hell. So gouge your eyes out, because it's better to be in this world blind and not be able to see a woman with lustful eyes. If that's really the standard of whether you go to hell or not, it's better to have no eyes here than to spend eternity in hell. And so you can see that these solutions are kind of ridiculous, right? Because if this is really the gospel, then this would be a pirate convention, right? We would have hooks and eye patches, wouldn't we? That's what we'd be handing out at the welcome table, because half of us or most of us would have gouged our eyes out and we would have cut our hands off. And so it'd be Captain Hook time here, right? Or we'd have a machete and a melon baller at the welcome table, and we'd kind of ask you, how are things going this week? And then we would implement this, right? So there has to be another message. There has to be another message from Jesus. Jesus is saying there is no righteousness to be had. He goes on and he says, you've heard it said, you shall not swear falsely. Or you've heard it said, an eye for an eye. Or you've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say, don't take an oath at all. Don't promise men anything. And turn the other cheek. If someone wants you to go a mile with them, go 2 miles. Refuse no one who wants to borrow money from you. So if I come up to you and I'm like, hey, you know what? I'd like to get a new car. Give me 30 grand. According to this, you've got to give it to me. That's how you're going to earn your righteousness. You've got to give it to me. Not only do you need to love your enemies, but you need to pray for them. And then he takes the standard even higher. So remember at the beginning, he said your righteousness has to exceed that of the scribes and Pharisees. And then in verse 48 of chapter 5, he says, you therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. That's the central point of this entire sermon. So let's sit there for a second. This is the standard. The standard is perfection. And whose perfection? God's perfection. You have to be as perfect as the Heavenly Father to enter heaven. To have a relationship with God, you have to be as perfect as God is perfect. And so that should eliminate any illusion that any of us have any chance of any kind of righteousness. The standard is perfection. So we have to sit there for a minute. We have to sit there for a minute and soak that in, that the standard is absolute perfection. And when that soaks into your noggin is when you begin to hunger and thirst for righteousness, when you begin to mourn over your condition, when you begin to see that you are poor in spirit. He goes on and he says, "For if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others of their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive you of your trespasses." So under this system, if your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. If your eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out. You have to be as good as the scribes and Pharisees. But wait a minute, you've got to be perfect, just like God is perfect. And the only way you can be perfect is to be perfectly forgiven. And if you don't forgive other people, then God is not going to forgive you. And then, how am I going to be judged? He says, "Judge not, that you won't be judged. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. And with the measure you use will be measured to you." So you can see these are some hard statements. These are some hard statements. So if we just stopped here, then we would all walk away. We would all walk away depressed. We would all walk away fearful of the fires of hell, because none of us could be perfect apart from Christ. Paul said it this way in Romans. He said, "Wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death?" And then, as we get to the end of the Sermon on the Mount, you see this invitation. So at the beginning, he said, you got to be perfect. Then he took the law and he raised the standard up to an absolutely ridiculous standard and ridiculous ways to try to manage it by gouging your eyes out and cutting your hand off. And then he said you had to be perfect. And then just as you're depressed and you're mourning your condition, then he offers a solution. And he says, ask God and it will be given to you. Seek him and you will find it. Knock and ask Christ to save you. Ask God to save you from this wretched condition, and it will be open for you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks, it will be opened. So we see that Jesus is the better coach. That if the standard is really 20 feet and the standard is really the Atlantic Ocean, then I've got to get my Olympians to give up all ways to try to do it on their own. You're never going to high jump 20 feet. You're never going to make it across the Atlantic Ocean. So let me show you another way. Here's the pole-to-pole vault. I'm going to do it for you. Here's the speedboat. Quit trying to swim on your own. Come get on the boat and let's go rescue other people together. Let's go rescue other people that are trying to swim on their own, that are trying to be good enough, that are trying to get to the Atlantic because they're drowning and they need another way. So let's come by on the speedboat and show them the way. For God has done what the law, weakened by the flesh, could not do, by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh. And for sin, he condemned sin in the flesh, in order that the righteous requirement of the law might be fulfilled in us. So you see what he did? Jesus lived the perfect life, died on the cross, and then when you accept him, your old self was crucified with him, you were buried with him, and then you were raised with him, and then you have been made righteous. You've been given Christ's perfection. The requirements of the law all that 20 feet or the Atlantic Ocean, the 2,000 miles or whatever it is, has been fulfilled by Christ and has been given to you as a gift. So Jesus wasn't lying when he said that your righteousness had to surpass those of the scribes and Pharisees. Jesus wasn't lying when he said, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. What he was doing was giving them and giving us an invitation to receive Christ's righteousness, to receive Christ's perfection, so that we are made perfect in Christ to achieve the standard of the law that we could never achieve on our own. The verse right here at the end of the Sermon on the Mount basically says God is a good God. God is a good God. He's a good coach. He's a good father. What kind of father, when their son asks for bread, is given a stone? Or what kind of person, when they ask for bread, when they ask for righteousness, are given a stone? Christ will set the standard very, very high so that you will never achieve it on your own, and then he offers it to you as a gift. And so God is a good God. He's not going to set an unachievable standard without a means with which to achieve it. The holiness and righteousness of God cannot be compromised. And our separation and our sin and our depravity and our inability to reach that standard cannot be watered down. And Jesus is the bridge up to those two. God has retained his perfect standard, and you can't get there on your own. So Christ gives you his righteousness as a gift. The Sermon on the Mount is not a manifesto to follow for daily living. It is the nail in the coffin of the death of any illusion that righteousness can be achieved rather than received. The Sermon on the Mount is designed for you to recognize that you are poor in spirit, to make you mourn, to tear down your pride and make you hunger and thirst for real righteousness, which is fulfilled or satisfied in Christ. And this remains true for us. Most of us here have placed our faith in Jesus. We have Christ in us. We've been given his righteousness. We've been made perfect, but we still hear the accusations of the enemy, the accusations of the world. Sometimes when our head hits the pillow, we try to evaluate ourselves, right? We try to evaluate ourselves on how we're doing. But remember the top of that column. Remember that the standard, if you're going to measure yourself by how you're performing, that's the measure. And that's the whole point. And so when we feel the condemnation from the world, when we feel the condemnation from the enemy, the solution is to come back and remember what you've been given, that you've been made holy and righteous and forgiven, and you can live from that new heart that you've been given. And when you measure yourself by the law, when you measure yourself by the condemnation of whoever it comes from, is when you will feel defeated and you will feel that mourning, and you will try to measure up and you try to solve it on your own and you start swimming, but then something clicks and we remember where our righteousness comes from, where our holiness comes from, where our perfection comes from. And then we say thank you. And then it's the grace of God that teaches us. The grace of God teaches us to say no to the world and yes to righteous and upright living. We still want to live from our hearts rather than measuring ourselves by this unachievable standard. So the world is going to take some kind of standard and water it down and then measure you against it, and you're going to find yourself less than. But remember, don't water down the standard, because then that points you back to the righteousness you have in Christ. Let's pray.